Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dr. Deep State. We have a show today entitled The Golden Age Equals Noahide, and we're going to break that apart with my special guest and friend, Aaron. And we're going to start out with a casual back and forth conversation, but I'll give you a general feeling of where this is going to go. It is in response to the inauguration this week and the announcement that we're about to enter a golden age. So we want to break that down just a little bit here and think about it in terms of what the paradigm is that people are operating in. And then a lot of the stuff we're going to go into, we're going to do over on our local station. There's only so far we're going to get today. We might get into, Kid Rock and the ear and all this stuff, maybe. But I'm really going to focus on this idea of a golden age and continue from where we were in the campaign for Armageddon. So without any further ado, Aaron, it's been a little bit of time. I hope you're doing over there well. He is on his way. I don't know if you're from an undisclosed location and I can talk about it, but I think you're on your way back to Tampa.
Yeah, we're stuck in the frozen northern tundra of southern Alabama. I was supposed to be going back yesterday, and we got snowed in 5 inches of snow in South Alabama. I lived here my whole young life, and never once had anything like that. And so global warming is kicking in.
Global warming.
Yeah.
You got to listen to the experts. Yeah, I
Mhm.
saw pictures from, well, you sent me one, but I saw, southern Louisiana
Yeah.
with just a bunch of snow down there.
Yeah.
And even where I am, the shake and bake part of the world, we even got a bit of a chill and had a school closing yesterday. But people up north would laugh at what we call a school closing. But
Girl, she does these great. She said,
oh,
talk to my friends, especially from the north. Your weather is drunk and in my backyard. I'm going to need you to come get her. Like, yeah, we don't know how to act down here. That's for sure.
yeah. So um, here's what I'm going to kind of begin. Sometimes I do a 1, 2, and 3. If there's a 1, 2, and 3, I guess I want to explain and talk a little bit about um, the Golden Age, what that signatures in terms of the campaign for Armageddon. I just want to talk about the paradigm that we're operating in and just maybe pull some of these ideas together with a couple of clips so you can kind of see where we're going with that generally as we're pulling some of the recent conversations together. This was actually prompted just a few days ago. It kind of ended up going in another direction. I didn't watch the inauguration. I've been very busy setting up courses, doing things with my locals community. I do 3 videos a week over there. We're going to have links in the description section. Again, one day we're going through this pull between the direction of the world in terms of Noahide and Singularity. We do that a day a week. We have a guest go in depth, do things on the community a day. We do sort of J question things one day. And sometimes we even have an additional day over there where we go in depth in a lot of this material. So that's on the locals group over there. Do you remember? It was Karl Rove. You mentioned that to me the other day. Do you remember that?
Yeah. So I, on the other hand, was watching all of this because I was visiting, sitting there 24/7 Fox News. So it was kind of interesting to sit there and listen to how everything was talked about. And Karl Rove brought up this point, because it was a constant loop of the injustices against Trump and how he survived all of these terrible things and all of these assassination attempts. And and Karl Rove said he should be getting a peace prize for giving us a vaccine that saved millions of lives. And then went on to talk about all these other things. I'm thinking to myself, like, there's no way at that level that you can be blind to the deaths and the injuries caused by the vaccine, and that there's no, there's no evidence that the vaccine actually saved lives. Like it's just not there. They haven't even identified the virus, from what I understand, right? So, um, Yeah, and then so you're looking at that, and it's like how can a guy say something so blatantly false and move on? You can see where they're moving with it because they gave Fauci his pardon, and then now they're talking about how Fauci damaged everyone by recommending lockdowns and masks. They're even saying openly on the news networks that the masks don't work. So they're focusing on those two things, but not the chemicals that they put in your bodies. You know, the one that actually causes damage.
So yes, during this time of euphoria, they plug in this message, and that's a nice little tactic. Karl Rove's, if you're kind of the chubby face kind of guy, he was called the brains of Bush, instrumental. I mean, at that level, of course, I'm going to talk about it. We're operating at another level here, but help do the PR to do the weapons of mass destruction. Even people like Jeffrey Sachs would open up and disclose this week that weapons of mass destruction was a PR thing, that we had to cook up something for an excuse to go over there. He actually put and Trump, this is the times we're living in. Again, 2025, it's the age of externalization. What does that mean? So Trump retweeted it, and it's like, I mean, even his rabid fans were going like, whoa. And then that's the whole thing with the negotiation in the Middle East right before that. And it looked like that was maybe a pivot piece. And we don't want to break that down right now. But so we found out that wasn't the case. It was a massive lie. There was massive profiteering, a regime change, and all of the rest. And just like back when I was growing up, there was something called Vietnam syndrome. We watched all the films, MASH was on, and all the, Oliver Stone, anti. And during the Gulf War, the PR troops have to get together. We're going to be transparent. We're going to pull you back in. And it's like, that's what they're doing with him right now. So at this moment, they're wheeling. I mean, they could have wheeled so many people out. They're wheeling that guy out. And with this message that just smacks of unreality at this euphoric moment. And, I don't want to get into all the techniques, but that's it. That's how they move the ball forward. And so from that, we were going to say, hey, we could just do a whole show talking about that. And it was they actually kind of memory hold that. It was hard to actually find information on it. So we're just going to talk just generally about paradigms and where we're at. So I'm going to talk a little bit more than Aaron here on YouTube. And when we go over to locals, it's going to be focused on the other idea that he had, how they move the ball forward dialectically, juxtaposing obedience and justice. It's a little bit heady, but I think he's really on to something to explain a lot of the events which are going on around us today, events in the church and how they're moving the ball forward in their synod circus. So it explains a lot of things, but we might introduce it here, but we're going to get into it more heavily over there. What I would like to introduce right now is just the notion of a paradigm that we are using. And in a moment, I'm going to play a clip from a Brazilian professor who I hope to speak to here sometime this year. His name is Carlos Bezerra. And I want to play a little bit for him. His view is the same as mine. And I can't tell you the entire paradigm, but I'll give you just the basic idea. Back, way back, YouTube started with this truther community, which kind of came out of that situation with the three buildings knocked down by 2 airplanes situation. And it kind of took a while till there was a community, a worldwide community. And the videos we're definitely up in 2012, 13. And then after that, it really became a robust community, and everybody was operating in the same paradigm. That's the same paradigm that there's a control mechanism up here controlling both sides and moving things forward in this sort of theater of the mind. The whole world's a stage, lifetime crisis actors, most of the political people. It's that kind of language, which I think the people that follow me are used to. The truth community, up until that was the standard narrative, whether you were Protestant or New Age, or atheist. That was just an understanding. That was the paradox. And I'm going to repeat that a little bit again here in a moment. But that movement got infiltrated right around 2019. And you remember what that was being prepared for, right? So they could put their own doctors, and it became part of what we call the alternative community. And it operates through an alternative narrative network where the same people promote each other and so forth. So people started kind of quote unquote waking up that the TV's lying to you. This isn't, so they're going to go over to the internet, and then they're going to catch you there and give you more information, but they're still keeping you in what we always call the right-left paradigm. So right now, I would suggest that what we call the truthers right now, if you want to call that generally what they used to be, they got migrated out to BitChute and Rumble and other stations. So they're the voices out there. Only on YouTube, basically, the people that can still sustain this narrative are smaller channels that talk in code and then hop over behind a local's wall or something like that. And that's why we go over there to really dig into the paradigm. So part of the understanding here is Aaron totally gets the paradigm. So when we talk, we have a currency with that. But one of the ways I'll say that the alternative narrative network, even if they're exposing and externalizing this stuff, they always keep you, and I know people that have looked into this, the general phrase is in the left-right paradigm. So what a phrase that I've used over the years, and I've always operated in this, it's been almost 8 years now I've been on with this channel, and my 2 books here are all operating within this. It's sort of assumed within the paradigms. But I first heard of, I oftentimes use this term accidental history. And that's what we're supposed to get sucked into. And the idea of accidental histories, if there's a fire, it's a natural fire. If there's a stock market crash, it's a natural crash. If there's a war, it just happened naturally. Who did what to whom? And nobody's looking on top of the curtain. And in short, what you do when you look at the top of who are the ultimate colonizers? So, classic way colonizers would operate, they'd go into Asia or Africa, they divide things up so people are fighting amongst each other, so they're not looking up at the controlling arm of things. And I think a lot of people are pretty aware of how this works. But the phrase accidental history, I once got, if anybody's ever heard of the book, none dare call it conspiracy, from 1970, and I've showed this a couple times over the year. I'm old enough, so I remember, I guess it's still around, something called Highlight Magazine. Have you ever heard of that, Aaron? You're younger than I am.
Yeah. Oh, I remember it. Yep.
When I was a kid, especially when you'd go into the dentist office, it would always be on the table. So none dare call, these are pretty reputable authors here that have some gravitas. And they, would ask an interesting question like, why is it the people that promote communism are the billionaires? Why is it that they're the men of the people? And again, I'll just say this to you. When I speak to my students, at university or at the college, I use this paradigm of accidental history because otherwise they don't understand what I'm saying. It's how we operate. We speak this way to our families and our friends. Sometimes we can kind of feel them out to see if they know what we're talking about. But accidental history is just, there is no hidden hand. That's crazy talk, right? None dare say that there's a hidden hand. But they ask these questions like, why do these billionaires like to promote communism? Doesn't that seem like a contradiction? And they open up with kind of one of these puzzles, which you're going to look at reality one way until somebody gives you the clue and you see a hidden dynamic underneath the picture. And I'm arguing right now that we are especially really kicked off into another phase with the inauguration and the quote, we're entering the golden age. Some people say we're just completely, the age of Pisces maybe began in the late 60s, and we're completely over that solar cycle. And that's how they kind of talk in the new age, like literally Pisces is behind us. And so a lot of the war for Armageddon, or the campaign, it's not a single event, but it is a war over our minds. It's a war over our bodies. It's 6th generation warfare. So it's not necessarily going to happen with guns and tanks and the sort of classic paradigm that we're living under. And the idea is we're in a fog of war because we can't figure out the puzzle pieces. And part of the puzzle pieces is terms that we've been told we can't go there. This year, especially, this Israeli journalist author Yuval Harari was, promoted again by the system to introduce these concepts. The idea again, God is dead, you're useless eaters, we're going to have to find something to do with you, you're going to watch pornography in the metaverse, and that we're going to write the new narratives. Who are the we? And of course, I've been talking about eugenics. Who are the we that are writing the new narrative? And what are we going to fit into? And the new narrative is going to be, transhumanism, cyborg, and Noahide. And so that's getting tipped off in a big way right now. And so Yuval Harari will say, no, there is no conspiracy, or they'll use the word grand conspiracy to make it sound absolutely ridiculous. And then, of course, that's the JQs are behind everything. And we have been biopolitically programmed our entire lives that you can't go there. So it's any other answer. It's something accidentally had to happen. And as long as we're there, if we're operating in a false paradigm, I'll go slow here and repeat this, we are going to be under the fog of war and come up with faulty solutions. Until we can embrace the enmity underneath this fog of war that's fogging up our minds, we will be essentially lost. So essentially what I'm saying here is I talk about biopolitics, and I don't want to get into that so heavy. I break it down constantly over on Locals, but it's sort of how Kabbalah, this magic, has been introduced into all of our institutions, all of our media. It's control of the body, mind, spirits of the entire population. This is a new stage of the war for Armageddon and the golden age that they're signaling. And it's the idea here is to move even another notch forward to the singularity and the Noahide. And it includes things like psyops and controlled events. And of course, we're in an age right now that I think I'll leave it go for just a moment. Aaron, do you have any thoughts right now about the paradigm? I'm sure most people that kind of get this had a process to kind of coming out of the fog and seeing, okay, I see it now. It doesn't usually happen at an instant, but a lot of people, it happened over the last 5 years. Things weren't adding up and they started going to the alternative, and things still weren't going up. And then they went to the media that got displaced, and then they started seeing the paradigm. And I'm sure you have your own story, right, Aaron? You're on mute, Aaron.
There we go. Sorry, thanks.
No problem.
I think the most important concept is the accidental history. When you realize that that's a thing that we've assumed, and once you start realizing that there is this belief in accidental history, that these events are organic, that they're part of just human nature, part of human history that's unfolding in front of us, and you realize that it's possible. You just got to realize that it's possible that these events aren't the way they seem. And I think one of the things I've been really spending a lot of time these last few weeks mulling over is, why is it that we attach ourselves so much to the concept of accidental history and organic events when there's so much evidence against it? When you look at the attack on the USS Liberty, when you look at the Gulf of Tonkin event, when you look at the fact that they knew that Pearl Harbor was going to get invaded, when you look at 3 buildings.
Lusitania.
Yeah, exactly. So there's all of these things that happen. We get attacked by Japan and then we invade Africa. What's happening here? So there's so much. Kennedy, everyone who's a normie can look at these things, and like you said, you brought up in the beginning about how they're now normalizing the fact that it was got us into the Gulf War, that made us invade Iraq, that it was all made up. And for some reason or another, we can't break our minds away from trusting those who have been put over us. Um, and so it's baffling to me. And I'm trying to understand what it is, why paradigms are so important. And I think it has something to do with security, I'm sure, but
Yeah.
I don't understand why we are so beholden to paradigms. It's one of the reasons why you can't talk to Protestants about Christianity,
Absolutely.
you know, and I think it just takes a certain level of courage and just personal confidence to be able to say I'm okay with questioning my reality, um, and being open to something that makes me see things more clearly. But I don't know. That's why I'm excited about this conversation. I'm excited about what's happening right now. Because for me, it goes back to the question of evangelization. So I feel like if we can start to understand what keeps people locked in the cave, that maybe we can start shedding light in a more effective way.
Maybe.
Maybe.
So let me plug this part in right now. I could pull it down for a visual, but I'm not. There's a journalist named Ron Unz, and he's Jewish, Harvard educated, was a successful entrepreneur and involved in politics in California. And he would never imagine, with the JQ, that these old dusty ideas that are like the words usually used by Wikipedia, he's doing that old canard again, the one off. And so he laid an article out, I believe it was released yesterday, which is a compilation of so many things. It's a Chinese perspective on I'm not going to say the full name, it's called the Protocols, which really blew up at the beginning of the 20th century, that talked about this JC, not JQ, but J, none dare call it. And he lays out about 15 books, and we're talking about names that are huge, like some of the biggest statesmen in the world, like Benjamin Disraeli and Winston Churchill, that talk directly to this, and all the other great. And then he said, what are the fate from these famous journalists that start uncovering this conspiracy, which is a paradigm? And he said they'll either literally get bumped off, or they're going to be memory hold, and their careers are going to be ruined per member. So he goes through about 15 famous landmark books that you have to go. Now, you don't have to understand what the Protocols is about. The true source of it, it's a copy of a copy of a copy, and who knows where it came from. But the other parallel conspiracy that parallels what we would call the Illuminati conspiracy or the communist conspiracy, there's really one conspiracy, and it's moving the world toward technological singularity and Noahide. So that's where I'm going to kind of go. And sometimes when I'm talking about events like Trump's ear, I sometimes fall back on my credentials or what academic publications, because people are sometimes used to some crazy kid or the crazy person in the basement kind of idea talking about it. And I want to refer to this, that there is a scholarly literature to rely on. It's just that it's been memory hold. So that's why I have this long series specifically within Catholic history and Catholic clergy and the hierarchy of the church that talk about precisely the exact same thing. This year, I'm working on the series from St. Stephen to St. Colby. They talk about the exact same thing, the enmity, and they put it in a biblical lens so we can see how it operates, the enmity through redemption history as God speaks to us through typology. And that's why we know God has not left the building. And that's why we know that sacred scripture has a divine author. There's no way humans could have put this together. When you open yourself up to this enmity and this typology, things blow up and you start coming back to reality. And that's the goal of the channel, is the fullness of reality again, is the Catholic social lens that's just hierarchical, historical, and sacramental. So I don't want to get too far, but that I just want to recap what the mission here is: to return to reality. The enemy wants us to blur the enmity between us and leave us in a fog of war so they can pursue their agenda. So yes, Ron Unz, I suggest you just type it in there. and it's yesterday's article, and all those books are classics. And what I've done is gone specifically within Catholicism, great books like this that have detailed it since the first century. It's one conspiracy, but we can't speak about it. It's become, a taboo topic. So what I'm going to do right now is play a little bit from Carlos Bezerra, who, again, I would like to have a conversation with. Now, I know I don't want to lose anybody with, attention issues, but I'm only going to play 2 minutes. He has a disease that affects his throat. I have found the translate button and I hope it works. I'm going to play only about 2 minutes and then I'm going to recap what he just said, because he's talking. The title of his video is A Trump Administration, What to Expect. And it's the same thing I'm saying. And what I'm saying is really just an extension of this tradition that identifies the enmity between the church and the synagogue and what their agenda is for us and for their vision. Okay, so I'm going to try it, and I hope everything goes smoothly.
Em nome do Pai, do Filho e do Espírito Santo. Queridos amigos do apostolado, Glórias de Maria, hoje, dia 21 de janeiro de 2025, ontem vocês acompanharam a posse do presidente norte-americano, Donald Trump. Aqueles que acompanham o meu canal sabem que não há nenhuma novidade aqui. Eu venho denunciando desde o princípio do meu apostolado o controle político que a seita Rabá Lubavitch tem no mundo atual e que esta mesma seita controla tanto a família do presidente Trump quanto controlava a família de seu antecessor Joe Biden. Esta mesma seita controla o primeiro-ministro de Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, controla igualmente o presidente ucraniano e o presidente russo, e estende seus tentáculos entre os políticos da nova direita na América do Sul também. Portanto, não se deixem enganar. Na minha série, ou na minha análise, melhor dizendo, sobre o filme Nosferatu, eu ali exponho de forma simples, mas que também é bem explicativo e didático, esta fórmula dialética em que a revolução avança de um lado promovendo o caos e de outro apresentando uma falsa solução que eu, naquela análise, chamei de, por um lado, os vampiros e, por outro lado, as bruxas. Uma metáfora, uma figura para demonstrar este jogo de tesouras, de pinça, dialético, cabalista, porque a sua origem é o próprio Satanás, o próprio demônio. Então, a agenda woke, promovida pelos globalistas ligados à esquerda internacional, e mesmo dentro do Vaticano, com os jesuítas, promove todo tipo de aberração contra as leis naturais. Vejam vocês, é que na semana passada o Vaticano soltou uma nota de imprensa dizendo que doravantes serão permitidos nos seminários.
Okay. So I'm going to do a recap of what he just said, and then I'm going to have Aaron just do a reflection for a moment, and then I'm going to do a quick reading about this. And I want to just recap what he said because I think it was a little unclear and some of the words didn't translate properly. So basically, I happened to get this video sent to me by Father Donald, and this is his recap. The political control is of this subgroup called the Lubovichers. You might know of them. Trump's daughter's married to one, and I've mentioned them over and over. So it's a group within a group in this cabal. And I'm very, like, if you look at my site, I call it the Dr. Deep State. The Deep State, the idea, it's not the Democrats, it's not the left and right. It goes back centuries. And the other thing I put cabal, because that's kind of like a taboo word, like you're supposed to kind of laugh it off. And there literally is a cabal that's in all of this literature, whether you're Disraeli or Churchill or all these great journalists or priests or bishops, they recognize a cabal. And in fact, one of our favorite documents over on Locals is called Christian Civilization from 1890. And they identify the distinction between the church and the synagogue, which typologically is the cabal. Okay, so let me go a little bit further here. So it's the Lubovichers, has over Trump as much as over Biden. This same sect controls the prime minister of Israel and Russia and in South America. Do not be fooled. Again, that word, the dialectic, how they move history over, how they move the left and right consciousness forward. The dialectic formula is of revolution, and it continues through chaos and false solutions. And he called it a game of scissors. It's a Cabalistic dialectic whose origin is Satan himself. Now, here's something. It also involves the Vatican and the Jesuits. So he himself denounces the conciliar church. He is not a sedevacantist, just FYI. Now, the solution here is the title of our program today. The solution to the problems that are going to come before us are the 7 laws of Noah. And the voluntary, get this, the voluntary apostasy of Christians. But there's one thing I want to stress right here that he's saying that's very unique. Okay, this is what I think that's utterly interesting. It's simple, but interesting. And he says, the synagogue, and that's the paradigm I use, broadcasts a news story, and depending on world reactions, they can back down or advance the agenda. It's very fascinating with what we're about to talk about. Because, back in the day, PR companies would call it a trial balloon. But literally, when you'd say people, don't get locked into the right, left, or even don't vote because it'll take your consciousness over. There's a demonic ontology that'll trap you into a paradigm. And then people ask, well, what do you want me to do? Because they love the paradigm, right? And of course, the book of Second Thessalonians said the world will come to a point where there's an operation of air. God gave them over because they did not love truth, but loved the world and the comfort of the world. Okay, not to sound preachy, but they put it out there. That's when you have the what do I do? You don't buy it. You tell your friends, do you believe this crap? That's what we do here. And you wake up to it. And I know that sounds crazy because once you give your consciousness over to it, you're giving it over to the spectacle, or what St. Augustine and Tertullian would call the demonic ontology of the spectacle. And those powers of the world keep you locked into it because it's the currency you have with friends and family and not sounding crazy. Right. So I thought that was fascinating for the question that Aaron and I always talk about, Aaron, especially with his group over there, what to do. He just tells you, they put it out there for you, they externalize it. And if you don't give them any feedback, they advance it. And I'm going to give you some perfect visual examples from photo ops taken this week where they're going to put it out there. And if you're not going to call it out, that, and it with the chaos magic, like Karl Rove putting it out just at the right time, it sticks in the mind. And we have this thing called cognitive dissonance. We know it don't add up, but what are you going to do with it? And that's why scripture says, don't become double-minded. Don't engage in these against the law of non-contradiction. You got to be clear that and resolve that contradiction, which takes pain to figure out. Okay, I've chatted a little bit. I think you watched that video a little bit last night as well, Aaron. Any reactions you had to it?
Yeah, when he brought about the Christian apostasy, I think the mechanism that we should all be looking at is Christian Zionism, because there are three big problems with Christian Zionism that I think people should be paying attention to. First and foremost is the idea of a dual covenant, that there's one for the cup, the chalice of the new covenant of the New Testament, which we poured out for many, which Christ, the ontological nature of Christ's crucifixion is that you had both man and God dying on the cross, where his death ontologically represented the death of humanity and the death of God, the death of the covenant of the old covenant, because you can't break a covenant except through death. A lot of people don't understand this, and it's something people should know. So when he died on the cross, the old covenant was fulfilled. That was the point of the sacrifice. When they blow the horn to remind God that he promised to send the lamb, John the Baptist said, here's the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. So his death on the cross ontologically ended the old covenant as by fulfilling it. And then he brought in the new covenant, which is fulfilled through grace. So Christian Zionism brings in this concept of a dual covenant, that the one with the old covenant still exists, which it doesn't. The other one that it does is it destroys the concept of church. So we already have a large enough struggle because no Protestant on the face of the earth can define universally what the word church means. So when Jesus says, if you have a problem with your brother, take it to the church, a Protestant doesn't know what to do with that. They'd start doing ninja backflips to try to figure something out, but they can't theologically define what Jesus meant when he said that. So when you bring in this Christian Zionism, it further dilutes the idea of church. And then the third thing that I think is important about this whole Christian Zionism is it brings in the work of man, where we buy into this Cabalistic idea that we have to bring about the conditions in order for the Messiah to come. So Protestants are buying into this, saying that, and they just agree with the Jews. It's like, well, we got to bring about the third temple because you're going to get, in your mind, the original Messiah, the first Messiah. We're going to get the return of the Messiah. So they buy into this idea that through the work of man, not God working through man, but through man working, period, that he can bring about the second coming. And that's just right in line with the Cabalistic idea that through the work of man, you can bring about the Messiah, the Mashiach. So I thought his bringing his point about them normalizing Christian apostasy was spot on. And it's something that we need to be looking at because it ties right into the Noahide laws. Because if you are a Christian Zionist, you're going to clap when they implement the
Yeah, I got a video about that. I also got a video, if we get to it, I got where the world is in terms of the construction of the third temple and those 3-year-old heifers that are just waiting. They're all fatted up and just waiting. So it looks like things could turn a corner over there. Interesting times. And I could talk about the apostasy in the church and take this in a lot of directions about where we're at in the clock of things. But one of the things I'll say about the paradigm, the enmity, what I mentioned last week is St. Stephen identified the enmity with the people that killed Christ. We don't talk like that anymore. It sounds strange, but that talk, connecting that with the spirit of martyrdom and militancy, opened the beatific vision that built Christian civilization. There's more steps involved in that, but that's my case. On the counter distinction and the typology, on the other end of that, our inability to identify that enmity, specifically what the professor of the Brazilian, I think it's São Paulo, the professor just mentioned, our ability will sustain the church and sustain our view of reality at the very least and keep the beatific vision alive. But you have to be able to identify those words. And, St. Stephen didn't say, the Masons, communism, killed. He didn't say that. That'll keep you in the accidental history paradigm that you're just kind of looking. And what I found is that people that really look for truth, when they find this paradigm, some are Protestants, some are Catholic, some are atheists, but they don't go any further because all of the dots are connected. And that's what we do here, bringing together the singularity, technological singularity and Noahide in the final chapter. And we dig really deep into Kabbalah. And we'll be going into that specifically, that chapter next week over on Locals. But I want to continue, and I want us to remember in our mind what he said. They put it out there to see how you're going to react. And sometimes, the chutzpah is when they really put it in your face and it's like they're laughing, like they're buying this. Really? Okay. Let's get rid. So, and I'll give you a couple visual examples from this week. And before I begin, I know some people are on a euphoric high. The battle was to create this woke culture and the diversity and everything, and then blame everything on that, do the illegals thing. And what he did in the, before I continue, and we get into this on Locals, I don't, part of my brain says, of course, good, like he's very, very distinctive with these executive orders. And by the way, that's a completely extra constitutional weird thing that people just buying the idea that there is such a thing as executive orders. They're a made up thing over the last decade or so. But, we are going to immediately, gather people up, do this. There are two genders. People are hungry to hear that. I get why people are high-fiving, but it's part of a script, okay, to buy into something much more dangerous. So I don't want to be all, he's so black pill. Hey, we all got tired of listening to that stuff. I'm glad the script has been changed, frankly. Everybody gets tired of that. So, but it's been manufactured, okay? So let me just read briefly, and then I want us to remember this idea. They put it out there and see the question, what do you want us to do? If your answer is just wait around and vote, you bought in, man. You bought your ticket in. You sold out. Okay, and I know people hate to hear that, but I'm talking about this day and this age, not every election, but I talked about in this critical golden age election. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I call the egregore. That's what traps you, the demonic trapping into a paradigm I call an egregore. It's a Cabalistic concept. It's very old. I don't want to get into it. I do it in both of my books. But that's how I explain how people can be so. Your IQ does not immune you from being trapped in this. Your creativity does not. When you look at all of the influencers, all of the politicians, all the talking heads, it doesn't matter if they know canon law. It doesn't matter if they're a military strategic genius. Once you're just caught in this accidental history and you're making an analysis from that, you will come up with faulty conclusions because you don't include the agenda and the group guiding the formula. So let me just read a little bit. And it's called the dialectics of revolution, because the enemy's in a perpetual revolution against God. Last time I talked about Edom, one of the characteristics of Edom is he's at war with God's, with the logos, God's intention, creation, and order of being. And so part of that idea, killing Christendom is killing God's order of being so they can build this utopia, right? Okay, so I'm going to cite a little bit here from another scholar, another Brazilian scholar called Attila Gramares, if I'm saying that right. I have heard it pronounced, but it's been a few years. Some people might know him from the Tradition and Action series, and he had a particular chapter in one of his books called The Desire to Destroy. And as part of these people, they call themselves the destroyers. Now, they're also attached to another group called the builders, because they always work in duality. So I don't want to get too crazy. But so what this model that I'm briefly going to just mention something from the French Revolution, but when we see the dialectic, we understand everything, the tactics used from the Protestant Revolution to the French Revolution to Vatican II to the Great Reset and the rebranding of the Great Reset, which is going on right now in the Golden Age. It's a rebranding of the Great Reset. So just a little bit, it begins with the creation of a revolutionary thoughts like build back better or do it again or do it right. Okay. And the apophatic negation of being. I don't want to get into that, but it's Gnostic reversal. So one example of that is Karl Rove turning the world upside down with that proposition that he should be getting a Medal of Honor and for something that it's just, they had to come so far with him being the father of the VAX, the warp speed guy, Captain Warp Speed. And first they kind of tinkered with, JFK coming over and whitewashing it that way, blaming it as much on Biden, just to get those thoughts out of there. Because what's going to eventually happen is an event that requires a solution, which will be Warp Speed 3.0. Okay, so because the revolution is predictable, it marches through history with a particular formula using Gnostic reversal. And I don't want to say weird terms to you like apophatic negation of, they're creating an anti-reality, an alternative reality. That's what the metaverse is, and that's where they're marching our minds for. God is being, they're moving us toward a world centered on non-being. The Antichrist will be an entity that absorbs complete non-being. And another word for that is demonology. Okay. So it's introduced into the public consciousness. By the way, I'm reading here from chapter 10 called The Demonic in Politics from my book. I don't have my name on here, Dr. Haugen. If anybody's wondering how to pronounce that, it's a Norwegian name, if you're wondering. I'll show a shot of Elon doing this in a moment, but if we get that far. So my name is Norwegian and it's pronounced Haugen. And again, both the books will be in the links in the description. So it's introduced into the public consciousness in order to activate the public's will and imagination. Those are the two things that work together, that take our mind off the beatific vision of Christ and into the vision of man. They activate your imagination. Picture this, and they get your will to go along with it, and it activates a certain ontology. Okay. So I don't want to get into this too heavy. So let me just try to shut up and read. So that's what they want, which is then directed through the tension of controlled opposition. So it's the right-left thing. Some people have heard the term controlled opposition. I think many people here get it, but a lot of people are simply incapable of getting it, even if they have a high IQ and other things. So some people just, it's like the picture puzzle. Sometimes I'll show in my class a picture of the old woman and the young woman, and some people simply can only see a young woman and only see the old woman, and some people can see both. So it is almost an art to some extent to see both, just like sometimes it's an art to see both sides of an ideology. Okay, in the French Revolution, there are two types of revolutionaries whose work harmonizes with each other, and he called it the Cabalistic. Professor Carlos Bezerra called it the Cabalistic scissors. Sometimes I call it the Cabalistic two-step. to move you forward. They work to harmonize each other. The first are the hotheads. This was in the French Revolution. They called one group the hotheads, or the militants, or the extremists. This would be your woke people. This would be somebody campaigning on, I'm going to let the illegal gangbangers in prison, we're going to give them free sex change operations. I mean, that's, I don't think the French Revolution went quite that far, but what they were doing in the French Revolution, they're trying to recreate reality, destroy the monarchy and the altar, and then rebuild a new image of man under fraternity and equality. And it's just, a different kind of, okay. So the second group are the moderates. And the language we use today is the Overton window. They push the Overton window and this kind of stuff. So we have the extremists and the moderates. Those who appear innocuous because they advance the revolution at a slower pace. The first group, the hotheads, charge ahead, even somewhat recklessly, and plant the standard that indicates the goal they want the revolution to achieve. So to the people on the left, that's what's going on right now. The press got the memo to kind of normalize a lot of what Trump does. The enemies of Trump, like Snoop Dogg, he's suddenly performing over there. It's this kind of thing it moves you back on both sides into the agenda, right? So, I can say so much of this when we just look at the optics of the inauguration. So they charge ahead, even somewhat recklessly, and plant the standard that indicates the goals they want the revolution to achieve. Because they appear to be so radical in most countries, with the WEF puppets in place all over the world, just got crazy, and people got tired of it. Open borders, people got tired of it, right? So even by the moderates, who will sympathize with many of the views, lament that the hotheads have gone too far. And that's where you get to the platform with the Republicans this year. They conceded on abortion. They conceded on homosexuality, whereas 5 years ago, it was central to their platform. And they just move it ahead on both sides. And they'll put the memo out to a lot of the I call them prostitutes, journalists, prostitutes, to now soften up on your view of Trump. And yeah, maybe we did go too far, and they move it that way. Okay. Yet in time, the moderate revolutionaries traveling at a slower speed eventually accomplished the original goals of the radicals. The extreme position of yesterday's hotheads becomes the new center. In time, the former hotheads even come to be revered as prophets who foretold the future and suffered persecution because they were misunderstood in their own time. Okay, I've talked a while. Aaron, can you help me out here a little bit? Any comments? And again, it's one conspiracy. In terms of sacred scripture, there's one conspiracy. I call it a cosmic conspiracy against God and man, against Christ and his church. It's to kill the church and make an anti-church in the image of man, which we could call the synagogue typologically.
Yeah, I mean, you think about when someone comes up to you and says, gives you really bad news, this is going to cost you a lot of money. It's only going to cost you this much. So you actually saved, $10,000, but it's still going to cost you $1,000. It's like, well, before it didn't cost me anything, And so this idea, and this is something that I just struggled with so much with many of my friends. I'm like, you're about to vote for the first time in your life for a pro-president who supports homosexuality. And so they gave us this entire transgender nonsense that's just that's in this multi-gender nonsense that makes people go, no, that is so crazy. And then they come back and they're like, okay, fine. Homosexuality is okay. First term abortion is okay. We're going to do in vitro fertilization. That's going to kill even more children, but that's okay. Just please, no more, non-binary nonsense and transgender nonsense. Let's get the guy women's bathroom. Okay. Homosexuality is fine, and they're accepting it. You could just watch it. It's like, no, you've got to go back and that's one of the things we always go back to in our conversations down here is like, what does tradition say? And when you brought up like the word that you brought up, if you look at all of this stuff, that's happening, the different, what are they doing and how are they doing it? You can get caught in a rabbit hole with these things. But if you go back to that word that you brought up, and that was one of the big language clarifications for me, was when you said the enmity. The enmity, it is against reality, because reality is truth, and truth points to Christ. Christ is not only truth, but he is reality. So this isn't rocket surgery, as an old instructor of mine used to say. It isn't. It really isn't complicated. It's not big brain stuff. Like, everything you need to know about how it all works is in the first 3 chapters of Genesis.
Yes.
Did he really say that? And it just keeps moving forward, and they just get us so wrapped up in the drama that this stuff, like, you use very clear language, and
Sometimes
explain this stuff is so difficult because the paradigm is so fixed, that it doesn't matter what words you use. It's like, how do you break this paradigm? Because it really is, Dr. Haugen. It's extremely simple. When you brought that up, like the enmity, I was like, that's it. I get it. And the place you can go is tradition.
it defines. So this was, I guess I say this a lot. People get to, so Eve was in a different ontological space. They were more connected to God's being in more perfect union, and they sinned. And we inherited that sin, and we were banned to a new ontological space here in this valley of tears. And we always want to explain how did we get here in this universe? Why do we have consciousness? Science can't explain that. And so God explains, and it's consistent throughout sacred scripture. It's consistent throughout human affairs, especially when you look at the rise and fall of empires. The seed of the woman is Christ, and Christ came to testify for the truth. And it's revealed to us through his incarnation and through sacred scripture about how we got here and the nature of our condition and who we were meant to be. We were meant to return to God. We're sort of banished from the garden.
Mm-hmm.
We're designed to be punished, but we're also designed, because Christians pick up their cross. There's punishment as part of this, to get reunited with God. It's our deepest desire, but we get lost in what St. Thomas would call a debased ecstasy. Instead of the ecstasy of getting all these lots together, just keep your eyes on Christ, we're replaced in this modern cycle of consumerism. And that's where once we lose that attachment, and accidental history is very helpful for that. When we identify the enmity, that's the serpent at work. He's trying to keep our eyes off there. Okay, so thank you for that, Aaron. That was good. And a couple ideas even brought to my mind, but let me just kind of try to get through a couple photo ops. So again, we're operating in this thing. There is this thing, and it matters to name the entity. It's the synagogue. And people, well, what does that mean? How is it organized? Smart people are like, is it invisible? Is it involuntary? And it's always been there. This is what the saints attest to, the saints that built Christian civilization, the saints that maintained it, the clerics from the late 19th century that drew on this and knew that the days were closing in, because complete control of the economy. And when we go over in the documents, the documents from 1890, Christian civilization, that were approved by the church, they said between 1865 and 1890, country by country, France, Bohemia, Germany, they came in. The synagogue, within 10 years, they controlled between 50 and 90% of each one of the economies, and they went for control of the mind. It's a biopolitical control of the mind. They took over and completely dominated all of the media and all of the universities, and they defined reality. They're working against people that rejected Christ And I hate, I know people balk at this information. Christianity was built upon an understanding that they killed God. I know that sounds shocking because we've been biopolitically controlled through our universities that you can't say that. And maybe I can't on YouTube. Maybe I won't be here next week, but they control all ideologies. Get it? All ideologies in order to control. And most people can't get this. They're willing to go. We talk about this on locals. Multiple generations will go and become Muslim, Buddhist, Christian in order to advance this. And regular people working in accidental history with that paradigm can't imagine that. They can't imagine that. And then they work through deception. And we talked about that. That's the characteristic of Edom. His nature is a rebel. Like we talked about the Messiah, the pianist Messiah that will come and rule through his groin, right? He's a rebel against God, right? He's working. Okay. So this isn't just going on in the modern world. This is going on throughout redemption history. They come into the covenant people through stealth, infiltration, and deception. They pretend to be part of the Levitical priesthood. When we're talking at the time of Herod, he was an Edomite. He pretended to truly have true authority over everybody. Well, I mean, in some sense he did. But this program is going on constantly. What we're kind of getting you to think about here with the advent of what was kicked off the golden age, we're going to see some interesting events in the next few years, and they're going to move us closer to the singularity and the Noahide. So we'll go over a couple pictures, and then I'm going to wind down, and we're going to go to locals. But I got a couple videos, but I'm just going to show you a picture here. This is called chutzpah. If you looked over, like there's a famous clip. I showed it, I believe, on locals, not over here. I might have even showed it on YouTube here too. A guy stood in Wisconsin in a city council meeting, and he looked at all the people, the COVIDian narrative that was going on, and he said, who is belong each step of this? And it's not just that they were from an ethnic group or had a religious affiliation. They specifically were dual citizens. That's part of the externalization that you have to know. The people that created that in America and throughout the world, here's who get that the people then the decision making were dual citizens. We know that in our government, the people that are in critical foreign policy are not just ethnically something, they're literally dual citizens. That book I just showed you was from 1970 called None Dare Call It Conspiracy. The authors spun that off a book from the early 1950s, and that book was titled None Dare Call It Treason. By definition, a nation that's the whole world system that we are in, this anarchical world system, the state system that's about 400 years old, one of the rules is each nation works to maximize its own objective, and it's not going to share goals with other nations. In other words, you can't have dual loyalties. By its very definition, it's treason, but they were so fast that people would call this treason. So whatever we look at, whatever situation, you're going to find out who was on the city council, who was on the state legislature, who was in parliament, and you're increasingly, this is the externalization. And when you have a dude in an important foreign policy, it's not just this, this Hegsarth guy with all the tattoos saying we have to bend a knee to Israel. It's, he's still a goy, right? But this is a guy literally wearing, think about what Professor Carlos Bezerra just said. They see how far they can take it, and they put that in front of your face. He's wearing his IDF uniform as a member from your state there, Aaron. And that's when people always go, well, what do you want me to do? Tell everybody that this is insanity. This is anti-reality. This is not consistent. And what did I just do? How does the revelation start? First, they put something that should cause cognitive dissonance in your mind, double thinking, the scripture would say it. They put it in your mind, and then they put it out there to see how you're going to react. And there's no pushback because we live in fear of saying that this is insanity. Since he's from your state, maybe you know the guy, maybe you have something to comment, and I'll show another picture.
Because we're one of the most populous state of these people, it's very understandable that would happen. But it kind of, it goes to this other notion that people have. It's like a reverse racism, like the soft racism. I forget how Thomas Sowell said it. But he talked about how a white liberal is the most dangerous thing to a black man, and it's like this. Oh, it's the soft racism of low expectations. And so so there it is. It's like you look at something like that, and then you're a Christian. You think you're a superior being because you're a Christian, and you look at somebody like that, and you're like, "But I support what you're doing. I'm behind you 100%. That's the chosen people. That's the promised land. Where else are you supposed to go? You deserve your own homeland. You have a right to it. It's biblically based." And then you now identify with this group of people that God himself, in the second person of the Holy Trinity, has told you was the synagogue of Satan. And it is, I think there's this very strange, the racism of low expectation. It's I'm here to help you. And yeah, it's this virtue signaling. Like they've named it all for us as they've gone through this woke exercise to make us beg for just normalizing homosexuality, to just beg for first term abortions as opposed to none. So there is this yeah, this weird thing about virtue signaling. Like, I'm a good person, right? Look at me, I'm a good person. I support you. Did you forget about the people, or you don't want to look at the people that are being murdered on an industrial scale by these people that you support?
Yeah. I'm thinking of a show like Will and Grace, how that seems passe. Can we just go back to that? Would be like Leave It to Beaver right now. Just go back to Will and Grace.
Yeah.
So 10 years ago, I remember I was teaching at the university there in Mississippi, and like even liberals would say, what, Starbucks is putting like non-gender signs on the bathroom, and that was, well, you maybe you're thinking, oh, it's Mississippi, it's backward. No, most people 10 years ago would have thought all the stuff that has been socially engineered, they thought it was crazy. And that's the power of social engineering, working to the left and right, getting it glued in your mind, so that in an election, people, well, we'll get to it, aren't looking at the massive deaths, our foreign policy, but they want to debate over their sometimes God-given right to use the other bathroom. I mean, 10 years ago, this would have been absolutely absurd. And you got the hothead and the moderate. They're working for the same team. All these politicians, and people can't accept that, or they're some people just can't see that. Vladimir Lenin called it the commanding heights of the economy. He said this 100 years ago. That's who runs the affairs of the East and the West. He called it out. That's why a lot of Marxist criticism can identify a lot of parts about how the world has become colonized. And we saw over the last 5 years, down to the level from the Bank of International Settlement to all the other adjacent banks down to your local ones, they have captured control of your city councils and your school boards. And if you want that funding, if you want a green light, if you want to be kosher, you get with the program. And so it's been instituted at a worldwide level. And that's why I call it the empire of spectacle. They know how to capture our mind piece by piece. Sometimes they go a little bit too far and have to back up. But here's a visual, and I'm not going to play the clip here, but I listened to this rabbi talking at the inauguration, and it didn't seem like that crazy. See, that's the point. He's like Will and Grace right now. But what he's saying is he's using the word God. Now, where he was speaking, you couldn't have a Christian using it. We'll get back to the other gal there. And I could be wrong there, but I don't think they would have had in that context. And I could be wrong there. But they have him using the word God in kind of nice language. But 50 years ago, that would have been wild, because 100 years ago, it would have been obscene. So they're defining our reality. We did a series last week about these people defining Catholic reality, defining saints like St. John Chrysostom, like what he meant. And that's the whole using Vatican II to a lens to define the rest of the history. Who are the architects of Vatican II and so forth? I don't want to get off topic, but it's really setting the pace for this golden age and getting comfortable with when we talk about God, it's this big fallacy called Judeo-Christianity. And I don't want to beat a dead horse. Modern Judaism is rabbinical Judaism. It's Cabalistic. It's a completely different concept of God. More simply put, Christ said, if you do not know the Son, you do not know the Father. Who it's Antichrist, people that reject my divinity, it's Antichrist. Don't yoke yourself with them. So, and I think a lot of people are not ready to hear a critique of that. So what I'll do instead is just juxtapose it at another gathering. Trump was in the crowd, and you have, I want to be careful how I speak about this person. She is a bishop, I believe an Anglican bishop. She looks to me like somebody that's going to be pretty cautious about how she uses her pronouns. And she's talking about all this unity means the trust, all this, it's Nancy Pelosi, Kamala talking points. And I think it was kind of set up when Trump left, someone from across the way, probably a journalist, says, what did you think? And he turns around and says, what did you think? And then he's like, whatever, I'm not down with that. And just giving the signal, I'm down with it. What the other guy said, how he defined God, not this woman, right? And so interesting optics. I'm not saying every last detail was staged, but in an event like this, I would say probably that's the case. And I remind people again, a famous quote from the CIA director, William Casey in 1980, our project will be complete when we have altered all of reality. When people don't know what's up is down, when the prophet was sent into Nineveh, they didn't know their right hand from their left hand. That's where they want the world, in this kind of perpetual state of just chaos and confusion, so that they can define their reality. They don't know. And we're hungry for a prophet. We need a prophet right now. We need somebody just that's going to come in and say something like, there's two genders. It's like, thank goodness. Somebody stood up on a natural stage and you know how hungry people were to hear that, right? Now, we can go that we'll talk about this on Locals, and then 5 minutes later, he's dancing to the Village People. Okay. Right. So they're introducing this contradiction. That's part of how they get you to buy into it, because you're so hungry. And they will show you some visuals. Like they had to make sure, I'll get to that here. They had to show you some visuals. They will show you visuals about some illegals being sent back. So at this point, how many people on the TV or in the alternative, they'll say with the fire situation, a few things don't add up, but this is the bigger reality in the golden age here. What does all this mean? We weren't able to talk about it unless Trump suddenly had a magic agreement, and then there's a ceasefire, and then we're a little more comfortable talking about it. But Trump said he looked at the picture of that location right there and said it's like a massive demolition, like he hadn't seen it before. Massive demolition site, and it's really got to be rebuilt in a different way. Well, as somebody that built his career as a real estate developer, and his daughter, the Chabadist, is married to a Chabadist who is a real estate developer and has plans to develop out there already, make beachfront property that'll be part of the new utopia. So yes, we see these events going on, but if you live in accidental history, you can say, yeah, over here in California, why were in the Palisades, a main reservoir was empty. The fire hydrants were empty. The insurance policies were canceled. You can only take that old bumbling deputy, Barney Fife, the people that can't shoot straight, and the DEI. You can only take that so far. I mean, these bumbling firefighters did not cancel people's insurance policy. This was an event. I'll be careful here. I'm still on YouTube. It is an event that had been premeditated with, therefore, an objective. And, so if you're listening to The Spectacle, People in Accidental History and the Alternative Narrative Network, and then, I'm sorry, Catholic influencers that are operating in that exact same one, they will be like the people that can't shoot straight. I can't remember the name of that film. I think Barney Fife was in that film too. What, Down Knox? The gang that couldn't, the apple dumpling game or something. I don't know. Anyway, I'm very old. So, so yeah, you're going to be the people that can't shoot straight because you can't call out what the church has always called out, because you're living under a Vatican II Nostra Aetate lens where everything's, we're pussyfooting around, walking on eggshells, not wanting to, and so when we're operating in that, we can't get people back to reality. That's what I'm arguing here. So when the people say, what do you do? Well, you're not going to have a big opportunity to vote again for 4 years, unless, like Trump said, you don't have to do it again. But yeah, I'm going to let you go with this image here because we're getting toward the end. But it is crazy that you'll watch these alternative people giving you breadcrumbs, but keeping you locked in the paradigm. Always. And that's how you identify them. And that's the term people use, is limited hangout. They'll give you a little more and a little more, but keep you in the paradigm. And I know for some people this is old hat, but maybe you appreciate just the fact that I'm defining the war on Armageddon. We can't fight it. We will be in the fog of war until we can identify the enmity and identify the agenda. And the agenda is an anti-Christian, the technological singularity and Noahide are anti-Christian. And so, Aaron mentioned a minute ago about like the district that he lives in. People are going to be introduced, and I'm about to show a clip, one of the singularity, very short, and then one of Noahide, just to kind of get us thinking. This stuff is going to be ramped up. So I'm going to shush up for just another minute. I've been talking way too long here, Aaron. What you got for me? Anything about these visuals or anything else you want to add?
I'll go back to the idea of God. When you brought up the rabbi, I saw that series of prayers. Martin Luther King Jr. wanna be remake, do his prayer. Then you had a Anglican, and you had a rabbi, and you had a cardinal. So what's the one thing that we see in Catholic discourse right now is that, do Muslims and do Jews have the same God as Christian when they say God? So dumb down the word God. God is a Trinitarian relational being. And that's who we understand as Christians. Why are we having a discussion about God? So what they've done is, or who God definition of God is, or what the word God means when we use it. So they've taken the very specific, and that's one of the hallmarks of Western Christianity, is that it is very specific in its language. One of the problems that the Eastern Church has with the Western Church is that we do get very specific about our terminology. God is Trinitarian and relational. And when someone goes up there and prays to Almighty God, they're talking to a different God. If you're a rabbi, you're talking to a different God. You're not talking to the same God. We do not have the same God. And you have theologians actually having conversations on YouTube about whether or not it's possible to acknowledge a Jewish God as the same God as the Christian God, or a Muslim God as the same God as a Christian God. And historically, traditionally, that answer was no, categorically. No one batted an eye over it. And they've just moved it. Like you were just talking about, you've got this hotheads and then the moderates, and where the hotheads are saying there is no God, that all gods are the same. And then the moderates are like, no, they're Abrahamic. No, they're not. So it's interesting how, if you, like you said, once you understand the enmity, you can start to see how they manipulate you and how they get compromised. So the only place that you can go back to, you mentioned that we need a prophet. We've had them through the ages. All we have to do is go look back, and they're all these people you talk about that are memory hold. It's all clear. We want a new prophet, but we don't need a new prophet. Christ came. The answer has been given. It's not rocket surgery. It really is extremely simple. The difficulty is actually seeing it. And I think a big key to that is coming to terms with this idea of an accidental history, and realizing that it's not, because you really do have to push the I believe button, like all the things you just talked about. You have to push the I believe that it is a grand conspiracy. I believe that they do control everything down to the local coroner and the sheriff, and I believe it. I don't have to know how. I don't have to know what, but I know who and I know why, and then I'm good. And when they throw out these confusing things like we're going to end, it's two genders. Well, in the backstage here, okay, we've got two genders. It's official now. But God is an amorphic, benign, non-defined term. And anybody can use the word God any way they want. We used to work fighting over the word the gender, but now we've settled that score. But God has become totally self-defined, self-referential. So yeah, that's where we're
Yeah,
going.
no, that's good. That's good, Aaron. It is just to get us back to, baseline. And during the Republican convention, they had some Hindu thing going on there. And for most people, praying in Hindu, most people like 10 years ago would have been going like, wait a minute, I don't know that much about sacred scripture, but I believe that St. Paul said their gods are idols. So when you do hear a rabbi, at least your mind kind of has been trained to think, okay, well, our covenant came from their covenant. There's some kind of connection. So you're just so glad. Oh, well, I'm glad he doesn't have some, Krishna guy up there, at least at the actual inaugural address. So it kind of framed us, got us prepared for this. But again, they put it out there. And if you're not going to pull it back or challenge it, that's your moment to say, what do I believe as a Christian or as a Catholic or whatever your belief is? Like, what do I believe? Is this consistent with this? Because, of course, the trick is the lesser of two evils. That would be great if it wasn't a manufactured reality, but it is. And we know that. This has been externalized. Representative Macy said last year, left or right, they all have the same babysitter. They have the same talking points. And one of the biggest illusions when I hear on Catholic, well, Trump said this Elon maybe said this. They're all working from a script. They maybe have a tiny bit of autonomy to reflect their personality, but they're working basically from a script. Elon does not sit there and text all these things all day when he runs 5 companies and now is in charge of our government or whatever. Right. And so when you still operate at that, it's just too hard for your, vision to do it. And some people figure it out. Like, how did they pull that 2 airplanes and 3? You have to kind of go and figure out, how do they have control of all aspects of all institutions? And that's where you go back. It was fait accompli back in 1890 when this document came out. And that was why they call it the JQ. How are we going to defend Christian civilization, knowing this reality, knowing that they're defining and increasingly redefining our own reality? So I'm going to play a little bit right here. One from the 2 big things going up. And I'll repeat again. I listened to little parts of the, I listened to it through the alternative media. So most people on the alternative that were kind of high-fiving about it, that there's 2 genders. We're going to start tracking them down. And people would say, who's going to object to that? Who wants, anyway, Singularity and Noahide. One of the connecting points is, this 1984 Brave New World surveillance system. That's one thing that it's a complete surveillance. The freedom that we have in Christ is going to be increasingly diminished. They're going to increasingly define what you can say and down to what you can believe. And we even know that we're getting information about sort of this pre-crime stuff. It's definitely going on a little bit more over there in the UK, but it'll be coming elsewhere. So anyway, this is just a minute, less than a minute of just putting it out there for you. Make sure the video,
Number 8, we will finally complete the biometric entry-exit visa tracking system, which we need desperately. For years, Congress has required biometric entry-exit visa tracking systems, but it has never been completed. The politicians are all talk, no action, never happens, never happens. Hillary Clinton, all talk. Unfortunately, when there is action, it's always the wrong decision. Do you ever notice?
See the technique there. Hillary Clinton, the hothead, so crazy. And what she's saying then, part of the justification moves forward, problem, reaction, solution. The establishment creates the problem, comes up with a preordained solution, moves you closer to that agenda of singularity and Noahide, which in short, what this means, like the French Revolution, these types have always been there, this touchy-feeling brotherhood, fraternity, equality. But on the other hand, there's a totalitarian regime waiting for us. So it's the same thing. These types operate consistently throughout history. But yes, so they will use part of that surveillance to use to justify us biometrically. And what both of these books are about, seeing through the singularity and the In Pursuit of the Metaverse, is it's that interconnection, the internet of bodies. Some people can kind of wonder about how realistic this is, and eventually cyborgism, which would be another way of just killing off humanity, making us into machines. But yeah, you get through this through the digital blockchain, first in the economy, then your medical records, and then more, it's full spectrum dominance. That's the end game of Kabbalah, and it's the end game of biopolitics. Okay. Any comment about Mr. Trump saying that there? I guess we can call him President Trump now.
Yeah, there it is. Let's now everyone who would have said no to getting a chip in their hand or registering their biometrics is going to be all on board. I can't wait. Now I can just zoom right through the line at the airport. I can go in and out of the country. I don't even have to have a passport anymore because I have my biometrics done. So yeah, and look, I can pay for my groceries at Whole Foods now with my hand. I thought that was stupid, 5 months ago. Now I think it's a great idea because Trump thinks Trump told me it's going to save us from an invasion of our border. Oop.
Oh yeah, we might wait. Well, I think we're already up to an hour and a half. We'll kind of cruise some facts, and then we'll dig into it over on Locals. We can get into the salute and how that again, that's how you start their agenda. Put a contradiction in the middle that creates chaos magic. It's how the egregore gets rolling. I'll go through a couple of pictures. Sometimes the expression used right now, the tech oligarchy, that's not what an oligarchy is. The oligarchy is who runs the world. It's the commanding heights of the economy. These people are cutouts that work for the oligarchy. They're not their own separate little thing. There is in place part of this grand conspiracy against God and man, against Christ and his church, is a century-old oligarchy. And that's, if you want to go back to this, the very beginning of my videos, it's almost 8 years ago, go back to the video number 1, what is Dr. Deep State? And the idea is you're working within this democratic, this is what I teach in. I get it, right? Everything's accidental. We, the people, get to, if you don't like them, throw them out of office. And you have to understand how oligarchy permeates. It's always present, pushing on monarchy, pushing on fascism, the force behind communism. It's always ever present. But so yes, these people, and they're there for the singularity aspect in spades, the surveillance state that you're going to love. So it's a little bit of 1984 heavy boot, but you're also going to, as Huxley would say, learn to love your servitude. So that's part of the magic of it. And I'll tell you, I like having, I don't know, do I have it here? I like being able to send people beautiful pictures and look at there's a lot of things I love about it. There are. I don't want it in my body. But there's a lot of things I like about it. There's the whole episode. We'll save this for Locals, the significance of not putting your hand. Again, it's part of starting the new revolution of the golden age, or the Golden Dawn by Christians completely see that. Just like he said out loud, Christians, I need your vote. I'm not a Christian, but I need your vote. But people would break it down. Is that what he said? Is that what he said? So we can talk about that a little bit over there. And again, all of the connections in spade between all the texts, the Palantir, the Singularity. This is, there's plenty of videos. I'm sure most of you kind of have the idea that this is locked and loaded and ready to go. I want to show a final video here of a Noahide thing. And before I continue, do you have anything, Aaron?
No, I'm good. I'm excited for this one.
Oh, it's real brief. It's real brief. We'll get into it a little bit more. Yeah. So this is, I dig, again, this is the 5-year anniversary of the book coming out. From the first chapter into the end, one thing that threads it together is the inception of Noahide tied with the Singularity. And so now more people are talking about Noahide, a few more out there, not many on YouTube because you have to be very careful. I just use the word Noahide. And I've made a couple videos, they're still up, so I guess I'm okay. So I'm only going to touch on it, but just one of the ways they've introduced it in the United States, they've introduced it various ways through the different parliaments or political systems throughout the world. It's a long story, but one of it is they want to kind of get rid of common law because that's tradition. Remember that reality is historical, hierarchical, and sacramental. One component, they want to pull on that historical thread and introduce new positive law. I don't want to get too, legal about it, but so they introduce it very trickily all the way through Jimmy Carter in America, but especially through Ronald Reagan, through Congress under education initiatives. And we're seeing signs right now that within the cabal, they're externalizing it. Now, your evangelical Christians are putting the hush hush on it. Doesn't mean that, not really happening. But I'll just give you a little, this is less than a minute. And I might even let the loop play a little bit long.
So we could teach these 7 laws of Noah in a public school, as long as they were teaching it as an educational thing.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Is it a problem if I said one of the 7 is to believe in God? Is that something we're
Absolutely
not allowed to say in a public school?
No, that is not true.
Okay. I shared with them that they don't need to be Jewish. They should just be a good person. And I had all the kids together say, just be a good person. We learned about the 7 laws of Noah here.
Yes, we did.
Okay.
And that, again, when we're looking at diversity and inclusion, man, we have to understand culture and why, just like we learned about the Quakers.
If I stood up and said, you all have to believe in God, that might be an issue. But if I said, Judaism believes that as long as people believe in God and are a good person, that's good, that would be fine.
That would be fine.
Right, but I can't
Because
tell them
that's
what to do.
understanding the religion. Yes.
Right, because I'm teaching them about the religion.
Yes.
Okay, that's interesting.
Absolutely.
Right, so we could teach these 7 laws of Noah in a public school, as long as they were teaching it as an educational thing.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Is it a problem?
Okay, so I think Aaron and I off screen before we got started, one of our things, we don't want to come off too black pill. This is about getting back to reality. There are some kind of difficult things some people have to get through, but it's very possible in my estimation that things could be going better. I think that's part of the script. I think there has to be this messianic egregore being built. I think people need to see some progress in a certain direction, and they need to kind of see kind of a new type of unity. So I think when you look at some of the visuals, you're going to see that he's not, this Trump character is going to not be maybe quite so provocative in some senses. So it's going to be speak a language, have solutions, and speak in a kind of language. I do believe, in my estimation, I don't talk about the future. I keep it very broad. Technological singularity and Noahide are coming your ways, and I'm trying to make those connections to help you identify the enmity, speak to it, because it breaks the spell.
Mhm.
And we can help people get back to reality. And reality is the fullness of God and his vision and his plan for our lives. And so I don't think necessarily they're rolling out the chopping block anytime soon, but we know that this will come from an event. And the solutions are already prepared for us, whether or not it's financial or military or, you know, an AI incursion or whatever it is, alien invasion, whatever it is, there will be an event. History repeats in these long cycles from the French Revolution, but we're living very much in a cycle that's very similar to the Weimar years, where people were crunched down. And, you know, there's all the books on genderism, and that's that was what was getting burnt because people got tired of it and they wanted somebody that stand up. And even more recently, we're working from a typology of colonialism, you know, and again, let's bring in Canada, let's redefine the Gulf, let's bring in Greenland, manifest destiny. Make America great. Now, if you don't focus on the $50 trillion debt, that can sound kind of interesting. So you're working in the age-old plan of the technocrats, or you can call them, you know, the Club of Rome. Many different people have had these plans. Communists have had them, right? So they're being reintroduced at this time of kind of euphoria and how that works. But you know, that's pretty much the idea I have. I want to dig into some of these a little bit more and go into some of the visuals that we have from the inauguration over on Locals. Aaron, I've liked today how you pulled this back to, you know, basic theology. We want a saints. I like that, but we don't need them. The whole idea is to get our need, we were wired to God's utopian vision. They want to take that, flip the categories. That's what all this magic is about. Trump should be getting a medal for being, they flip the categories and suddenly it becomes a paradigm, because we have to think in paradigms to make sense of reality. To get to the universal, we go through particulars. We have to accumulate sets of particulars in order to construct reality, have some sort of heuristic construction of reality. So we use paradigms. And anybody, you know, most people that are adults have gone through paradigm change. I used to be a liberal, but I became a conservative. I used to be a conservative. Used to be a feminist, and now I don't believe in it, became a traditionalist or whatever. We've all went through different paradigms. I certainly have in my life. And it's tricky because you feel like the carpet's getting pulled from underneath you. The ground of being is pulled from beneath you. And this paradigm that I'm suggesting is an age-old paradigm that's always been there. It's the paradigm that built Christian civilization, and it's our means to maintain our collective. We can do it our own for our own redemption, because they are going to deceive us into this mark of the beast kind of thing. We've seen that more recently in the typology, how we just needed a solution. We trusted the science, and we were duped. And, you know, we were duped with weapons of mass destruction. But why? You know, that's Aaron's question. How do people fall for it again? It's just because we need these, and we are created to be a type of sheep. And Christ promises that he'll be our, you know, master, our sheep herder. He was the sheep of salvation that came upon us to lead us. But the enemy wants to hurt us. And they conspire with the powers of this world and the principalities of this world and the prince of the air, because they have empowered. If they most directly work against Christ and invert that reality, they're empowered by the spirits of this world. That's why, you know, the book of the Apocalypse says, get out of her. The kings of this world have drunk of the wine of her fornication. if you're not getting out of her, he'll give you over to this operation of air. God will give you over to it because you do not love the truth. Now, nobody wants to hear someone say they have a monopoly on what truth is. And that's why I say I'm not offering you a unique perspective. I'm offering you the perspective that built Christian civilization, and that the church has recognized that in order to defend Mother Church, we must be able to speak about the enmity, which is the actual agenda and how it operates. And that was why it's such a crisis in the late 19th century, because it was done so rapidly and so completely within such a short period of time. And again, there's a lot of brave people, both inside of the church and outside of the church, that came out and wrote great books in the 1920s and the 1930s. But with the events of with the Second World War and that great narrative that came out, begins with an H and it's a big number. They got us to forget about a big H that was the Armenians, that was the Ukrainians, that was the Russians, that was the Germans. They forget the one against Christ, where priests and Catholic, both in the East and the West, were put in gulags, were put in concentration camps. We forget about that because we go with the script. And so I don't think when we're getting these warnings in Scripture about these times, the idea is to get out of her, get back to the narrative for our own salvation and for saving people. And the analysis will not work unless we are open about how the church has always spoke about this. And that's why the Catholic Church is unique, because it alone has been speaking about this conspiracy for 1950 years. Then we get the mid-century, and all that material was memory hold as the time we get this new counter narrative, the new Holocaustianity that replaces it and then is embedded in Vatican II and documents like Nostra Aetate. And we have to be able to also recognize that that's a clever little wording. It identifies the enmity, the older brother, the relationship. They're our older brother. They're going to speak and define God for us, minus the enmity, minus the traditional understanding. We can't get back to that. And again, I shouldn't have to say this. We do this in a spirit of love, because unless you do this in a spirit of love and your heart is in that place, you will only be feeding this beast. If you come out of this and see this conspiracy through a cardinal or worldly lens, you feed the beast. You can only do it in the way that the saints of the church and in the mind of Christ, in the way the saints of otherwise, you feed the beast. That's my kind of final thoughts. And I'll let you conclude, Aaron. By the way, I've really enjoyed having you on today.
Yeah, it was good to see you again. Missed you. Yeah, the sheep, my sheep will know my voice. And if you think about it from that analogy, like you brought up, it's like we are sheeple. We're meant to be sheeple. We're created and to fall underneath an order in heaven, an order in hell. There's an order in earth, a hierarchy. And I think it's important that if we look at how we fight this, the do is that sheep will go in herds, right? And if enough of us hear his voice and enough of us walk in the right direction, enough of us say we're not going to follow that voice over there, we're not going to walk off the cliff, then you'll start to see more and more people start going the right way. So we have to know his voice so that other people can start to hear it. So the do is returning to tradition. The do is returning to the historical church, and seeing that. And I think we'll get further into some of those ideas about what that looks like later. But I think that's the key takeaway, is that this is all about understanding the voice of God as it's been given to us over the 2 millennia since his birth, death, and resurrection and ascension, right?
Absolutely. Yep. And Christ said, if you love me, you'll follow my commandments. Of course, Christ was always embedded in the 10 commandments, but he had other commandments, like to eat my body.
Mhm.
And he said, do not eat the leaven of the Pharisees. And he told us to be wise as serpents, but gentle as doves. So if you love him, you will start thinking like, I don't want to function in an operation of air. And maybe there is something to this idea. It's not nice to say, but I invite people to go over on our locals, in our locals community. The link is there. We do 3 videos a week, and you'll see a community that sees the deep state and the deep church, same cabal, same agenda. And you can see people that work in order to enhance each other's faith journey. We do have some discussions. It gets a little tense about, the New Order Mass and Vatican II. And there's, invariably you're going to have some differences of opinion, but we really encourage each other to do all these kind of discussions in a spirit of love and in a spirit that we're growing each other, that we can identify this and not only keep our spiritual life going, but we can actually enhance our spiritual life. So I'm going to say goodbye to Aaron and goodbye to all of you all out there. And this has been Dr. Deep State.